It's Steelers versus Ravens week, and on the Friday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast, we're going to be breaking down a lot. Matt Canada firing off at CBS for the comments that he says they took out of context. Najee Harris firing off in defense of the Steelers coaches. So much firing off, we got to fire off on our takes on that here on the North Shore Drive podcast. From the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko coming at you. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. As always, we bring you this episode on your favorite podcasting platforms and on YouTube. You can find these episodes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and on Saturday when we do the Acrisure Fan Advantage, talking to an opponent expert here. But we always have daily content coming out from our Pittsburgh Post-Gazette writers right here on the Post-Gazette Sports Channel. We're joined by Brian Batko, one of our esteemed Steelers beat writers. He's out in the woods by the Steelers facility after a rousing Matt Canada press conference. Steelers Matt Canada, offensive coordinator, he's been a punching bag for so long, but this is the first time I think I've heard him really punch back in a media session. Brian, can you break down what happened here on this Thursday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, by the time people hear this, it might be Friday, but you know, we're taping this fresh off of the coordinator availability for the Steelers, and you know, our Ray Fittipaldo went into that, willing to ask Matt Canada about the bid on the CBS broadcast. I think it was CBS, right?
Yes, CBS.
Yeah, against the Texans. Just a little kind of throwaway nugget that in their pre-production meeting, Canada mentioned something about how the Steelers offense is not built to come from behind, and Canada probably gave the longest answer I've ever heard from him, Chris, to be honest. He started with, "I'm glad you asked that question," which if you've ever heard one of these scrums with Canada, he's usually not real glad to get any of the questions. But this one was one that he clearly took offense to, and he basically explained that it was misinterpreted / taken out of context. And as we know in the media business, what we do, one little thing gets out like that, and suddenly it just gets chopped up and churned through the news cycle, and
it does,
and taken in all sorts of different directions. So, I mean, I think it does start at the source with, I believe it was Spiro Didis on the call there with Adam Archuleta, who met with Canada before that Texans game. And it got spun a lot of different ways by a lot of different people. Of the Steelers are admitting their offense stinks. Canada can only play a certain way. But his overall point, agree or disagree, was what he meant was he was referring to the Niners game week 1 when they kind of had to scrap the whole game plan. They had to stop running. They had to keep dropping back and throwing because they were down 3 scores, well into the second half. And his assertion is that nobody builds a game plan to be down 3 scores in the second half and suddenly have to throw all the time. So overall point from Canada, he does think they have a team, and he does feel they have the personnel that they can come back if they get down in games. Trailing is not a death sentence for them. He took offense to it as a slight to his players, to the overall offense, and that's why he was so hacked off about it and went on for probably a good 2 minutes dealing with that question.
Man, that is a lot from Matt Canada right there, talking about a few things. Before we get into more, that would remind you that because on Fridays I'm here while Brian is working hard. I'm here at Mike's Beer Bar kicking back, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh, where you can find over 20 television screens, as you see some of them behind me here. I'm on location recording this show. You can also try one of their 500 different available beers, 300 of those beers being local, 80 of those beers being available on tap. And as we always do on Fridays, we go through our Friday flights here on the North Shore Drive podcast from Mike's Beer Bar. First beer is Grist House Tentacle Horizon. It's a New England IPA, 7.1%. Tried it a while ago, and it was fabulous. It's a great way to start your flight. Come here in Mike's Beer Bar. Check out all the different beers they have available. We'll go through more of their amazing beers later in the show. But man, Brian, it sounds like Matt Canada wants to drink a beer after having to deal with that. And I mean, like,
probably does.
think most Steelers fans are drinking beers when they're watching his offense, trying to get through it. But I thought that was an interesting thing. We've had a few like kind of fiery or at least like passionate responses in back-to-back days here. After Matt Canada said that on Thursday, Najee Harris spoke to us Wednesday after practice, and
he was fired up as well.
I wanted to play his clip here because we had it, and he addressed the criticisms of Steelers coaching. Here was Steelers running back Najee Harris Wednesday.
And I mean, I see everybody talking about this coaching stuff about the play calling, but Brett, like, do y'all know how football works? Coaches only could coach, but we got to execute the plays. Like, we're not trying to point the finger at all. This is not the time to do that. Neither it keeps being a conversation to be brought up, like, or not even a conversation brought up, but things that's just talked about so much. It's crazy. Like, we have to execute at the end of the day, no matter who's back there calling the plays. You know what I mean? We can't just keep looking at the coaches as an outlet or whatever y'all putting out there as outlets. It's just stupid what y'all doing, really. You know what I mean? We can't just keep looking at and pointing fingers. We got to point at ourselves. It's the man in the mirror, really. You know what I mean? This is the NFL. Everybody runs the same damn plays. You know what I mean? Everybody disguises it differently, but you know what I mean? It's just how we gonna play it, and we're not. Truthfully, I think that we're just not playing right with that edge right now, and that's what we need to do better.
Najee Harris called a team meeting earlier this week to try to get the offense in order. And Brian, I agree with the assessment that the offense still has to play better. You know, whatever the play calls are, however you feel about Matt Canada, there's open on that 4th and 1 when they turned the ball over and Kenny Pickett got hurt. There were like 3 open receivers and a lane to run, and Kenny Pickett chose none of those. There's been plenty of plays this year where a key block, just a reasonable block in a situation that should have been made could have opened up a play, and it didn't. There's been so many execution points that if the Steelers just did what they were supposed to do on given plays in reasonable situations, this offense would look so much better. And I think that there'd be less noise about coordinators and play calling and all that stuff right now. And they might even have a winning record because they wouldn't have fumbled so much against the Texans. I still think the Niners game was going to be out of their reach because that's just a really good team. But Brian, what's your assessment hearing Najee Harris, speak that way after a practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're closing ranks around the coaching staff and maybe the members or member of this team who needs it the most in Canada. And, you know, this isn't a new diatribe from Najee. We heard him sound very similar early last season when things weren't going well offensively. I want to say it was actually after week 3 and not week 4. And he kind of went on a very similar tangent about, you know, this is a media creation. And yeah, I mean, that kind of always happens, right? When a team is not functioning the way it should, it's easy to just kind of turn. And if, you know, you don't want to point the finger at anybody within, so you kind of just lash out at somebody. We're the easy target. Fans sometimes are the easy target. Social media, eggs, and anonymous Twitter accounts are the easy targets. But yeah, I mean, I buy what he's selling to an extent. I would probably have to disagree with him about everybody running the same plays in the NFL. Like, I get what he's saying. You know, every coach at this level understands scheme and understands, you know, there's only 2 things you can do last time I checked in football, right? You can run it or you can throw it, but it's kind of an oversimplification, probably in the name of rallying the troops for this offense. So we've been here before with Najee. Maybe he feels emboldened to talk this way after how well he played as the train comes behind me. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting for sure. You know, it's a challenge to his teammates, and for all of his faults, you know, I think at times Najee's been a little too close to the old throwing the lineman under the bus type deal, and you could probably even argue that again with what he said Wednesday. But for every time that he does get up there and maybe say a little too much or speak out of turn, he's never really been one to shift blame to the coaches, although he did acknowledge also Wednesday that sometimes he's upset when he gets taken out, but that's just because he's a competitor and they all want the ball more.
I mean, that's a natural part of things. If you want to be able to do it, you know, there's that's normal. But I think what Najee Harris's statement kind of shows is that he, at least as a spokesperson for the Steelers offense, he's like, look, we got to focus on ourselves. We got to focus. We got to stop worrying about what other people are saying. We don't do. There are plays to be made in front of them, and you know, regardless of who calls the plays, if Kenny Pickett doesn't throw it to the open guy, if Andy Reid quits the Kansas City Chiefs head coaching job to become your offensive coordinator, and you get wide open receivers over the middle, and you don't throw it to him, the offense is still going to look bad, and everyone's going to be saying, well, the play calls stink. No, You have to execute what's in front of you. And this does not alleviate Matt Canada from any other issues that have been going on, because I think that he certainly has a lot of faults in his game, and that's absolutely part of it. But I think Najee Harris is kind of ringing the bell, and it makes me wonder, Brian, if this could be a rallying point for this offense. Maybe not to just win this game, but like if this could be a point where like hey, we do have to play with a better edge. We do have to stop being so. We have to get back to the identity of being a physical football team, and that being the emphasis on how they score.
We'll see. My only point on that, Chris, as far as it being a rallying point, again, if I'm not mistaken, which I went back and looked last night, so I think I have this correct. Najee's rant, similar to this one a year ago, was before week 4. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
They lost to the Jets. Mitch Trubisky got benched after some sort of locker room altercation with Diontae Johnson. Kenny Pickett came in, and they didn't win that one. They went out and got shelled by the Bills and the Eagles before the bye, and then things eventually started to turn around. So I don't know that in 2022 Najee's comments particularly lit a fire under anybody, but we'll see what happens this year.
We'll see what happens. Every year is a different situation, and you weren't playing without TJ Watt in a game that you were supposed to win as you were this year. But this is the Ravens. That's a major matchup. We'll talk about that matchup in just a little bit here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko from our Steelers beat here. But first, before we do anything else, I want to remind you this show is sponsored by Mike's Beer Bar. Mike's Beer Bar, the number one bar in all of Pittsburgh. You come here, you can try one of their 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are available from local areas, and 80 of those local beers are on tap, ready for you to go. You can try all these different beers in different flights, which we're going to explain to you all throughout this show for their Friday flights. When you get here to Mike's, ask for the Friday flight. They'll hook you up with all these different things that you can try here. We have a lot more beers to sample, but also when you get here, there's over 20 televisions. You can reserve a table with your game in mind, whether it's college football, NFL, NBA, NHL, Premier League, anything you want sports-wise, they'll get on a TV for you and your friends to watch while you enjoy beers. And their amazing food options like Steak on a Stone, where they bring you a choice cut of steak on a heated stone. Every piece you cut off, you press it to the stone, it heats to the heat that you like, and then you eat it, and you're having the best steak experience you can have here in the city of Pittsburgh. Come to Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh, and when you get here, tell them Chris sent you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter here with Brian Batko, and now it's time for the Acrisure Fan Advantage, where we take burning questions from you, the fans, and bring them on the show. This week's question comes from Adam B., who says, I have listened to, God help me, hours of Steelers content in the last few weeks. I haven't heard anyone comment on the impact of Diontae Johnson's absence on the offense. He has his faults, but he's a threat the defenses no longer have to take into account. How much of the Steelers' offensive struggles do you think could be related? Now, Brian, Diontae Johnson, we kind of haven't talked about him because he hasn't been available. He's on injured reserve. He's not going to be coming back. I think there's a lot of things to focus on outside of his injury. But certainly, Diontae Johnson is one of the better route runners in the NFL. He gets open. He presents targets for Kenny Pickett. And I do think he would help this offense when he does come back, because he's supposed to come back. I think he's expected to come back after the bye week or sometime shortly after that, because they won't be back for this game. They buy the bye the next week, and then they play the Rams on the road, I believe. But when he does come back, how much do you think that changes the Steelers' offense, if it does at all?
I think it can help. I'm not going to chalk up too much of this inconsistency to Diontae Johnson, but you're right. I mean, I think when you're trying to do quick game stuff like the Steelers tried to get to a lot against the Texans, it helps to have somebody who can uncover very quickly, and nobody on this roster is better at doing that than Diontae Johnson. I have to imagine that a lot of the playbook is probably not as favorable or preferable now by Matt Canada and Kenny Pickett without your number one receiver, the guy who's the best at getting that separation and moving the chains being in there. Allen Robinson, for all his abilities as a savvy veteran receiver, and I think he's reliable moving the chains. We know he helped close out the Raiders game, but he's not somebody who scares defenses in any way at this point at 30 years old. And
right,
that's what you're kind of losing the most, I think, without Johnson. Calvin Austin, I think he's doing his part. He's not featured nearly as much as Johnson was. I mean, the targets just aren't there, but I think not only do you not have Johnson to throw to, but it's also allowing teams to devote more attention perhaps to George Pickens. We know the Texans did a really good job of that and taking him away. And For all that Calvin Austin can threaten DBs over the top in secondaries, still not somebody with a huge track record of it. So yeah, I mean, it's notable, but at the same time, they've had these issues before when he's been in there. So, I can't put too much stock into it, but I think it's a fair point by our man Adam that, he was starting to get going in week 1 against the Niners. He wasn't going to save them that day, but he was showing some juice and some energy in that second half before he went down with the hamstring. So it's a loss for the Steelers offense for sure. To me, it's just not a huge one.
See, my thing is that for the offense right now, they're looking for anything to click. I think this is a group that does have talent on it, that does have potential on it, and that sometimes when things are going wrong, it reminds me of the 2014 Steelers when they had Ben Roethlisberger, they had Martavis Bryant, they had Antonio Brown, they had Le'Veon Bell, and like at that point, they weren't the killer bees. Everyone was kind of like, will this Steelers offense ever be good again? Like, will it ever be? And then it just took them kind of finding their groove for them to get into a rhythm and say, oh, this is what we're good at. Check downs to Le'Veon Bell, Brian on the deep ball, Brown on his different routes. And it took the full cast of that for them to find that out. I'm not saying that this is about to be the killer bees, but my point is, if they can have all their weapons available to them, it makes it that much easier for them to find different things that could get them into a rhythm. And right now, they were already limited coming into the season with Diontae Johnson. And Diontae Johnson in that Niners game, even outside of the plays that he did make before he got injured, he was getting open. Like there were times I'm just like, man, if Kenny Pickett could just throw him the ball, he could change the game. He could give them a shot in this, and he wasn't doing that. And if Diontae Johnson comes back and Kenny Pickett's still not getting the ball when he's getting open, nothing's going to change. But having him back to give him that opportunity could be the difference if it's taken. And I think sometimes it just takes hitting the right play at the right moment to spark something, to build some momentum for a young offense that's still trying to find its identity.
Well, you're also not going to have your probably second, best chemistry type guy with Kenny Pickett and Pat Freiermuth, who's going to miss at least one game, probably more like 2 or 3. So that also is kind of one of the more irreplaceable players on this offense, as we discussed the other day.
There's a lot of things the Steelers are going through right now offensively. Darnell Washington playing. We talked about that a little bit on the Wednesday episode. We got a lot more to talk about here with this upcoming matchup with the Baltimore Ravens here on the North Shore Drive podcast. This is the Acrisure Fan Advantage. Thank you to Adam B for your question. You can get your question on the show by going to acrisure.com/fan advantage. And for more information, you can submit your questions there. But every Friday, we're going to take your questions, answer one of them right here on the show. And then every Saturday, we have an opponent expert on the Steelers' upcoming opponent. This week it's the Baltimore Ravens. We'll have an expert talking with us on Saturday right here on the show. Tune back in for that there. We still got a lot more to talk about, though, on this show right here. We're starting to get you ready for Steelers-Ravens coming up right after this break. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko coming at you on a Friday here. Brian, before we continue, I want to talk about some of these other beers here. We have some of these amazing beers from Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you come here, you have 500 different ones available. One of them is called the Juniata Yam Session. It's a sweet potato beer. It's a session beer that's awesome. It's just 4.7%, and it just makes you think fall. It has me ready for Thanksgiving already.
I'd try that. I would definitely try that. I love some yams.
Yams are so awesome. They're one of my favorite underrated parts of Thanksgiving. And, man, I know it's early October, but I can't wait for some turkey and yams and mashed potatoes. And get me going. Anyways, come to Mike's Beer Bar to try out all the different beers they have available here. We have a couple more we'll mention. Brian, while the Steelers are struggling to find an identity, the Ravens look like they found a few. One, Lamar Jackson is playing at a very high level. He scored 4 touchdowns last week against the Cleveland Browns. And meanwhile, their defense is allowing the fewest yards per pass in the NFL and allowing the 7th fewest yards per rush in the NFL. They're playing at a high level, and they are 3-1 coming into this game against the Steelers. What do you look at as, like, if the Steelers are going to try to battle back against all the things the Ravens do well from what you've seen so far, that they have to do the most?
They've got to play stout defense. They've got to muck this game up, I think, the way that they've tended to do over these, this era in which Lamar's played against them. It's, he's missed them a lot because of injuries. He's 1-2 against the Steelers as a starter. So, and he's just been, I think he's taken 18 sacks or something like that in those games, and 4 to 6 touchdown to interception ratio. So they've had his number for sure. And you're going to have to find a way to do that again, whether that's TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, answering the bell after getting taken out of the ring by the Texans. for the most part, other than a few plays here and there. They've got to look like the guys who got it done last time the Steelers were engaged in a rough and tumble AFC North battle at Acrisure Stadium, week 2 against the Browns on Monday Night Football. So that's to me going to be the key. Easier said than done, but Ronnie Stanley, if he's in there at left tackle for the Ravens, he's been banged up, hasn't played since week 1. His backup Patrick McCarry, I think you can certainly get one over on him if you're Alex Highsmith. Morgan Moses on the other side. If you're TJ Watt, you can't let him run you out of the play the way George Fant did for the Texans as frequently as we all, none of us expected. So, and also splash plays. Find a way to get those. The Texans stayed ahead of schedule, stayed ahead of the chains, kept you out of those situations where you can pin your ears back and force them into a mistake. If you couldn't make CJ Stroud do it as a rookie, don't really love your chances of getting Lamar Jackson to do it, but we know he can be aggressive at times. And I think this is a key game for Minkah Fitzpatrick too, who hasn't made any splash yet in 2023. You've got to think law of averages. Odds are he's going to find the ball in his hands at some point.
I agree. Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to be a big factor. He's been a big factor before in key moments against the Ravens. He had that key breakup back in 2020 that sealed the game in that one. Morgan Moses could be interesting. He did not practice on Wednesday. We'll see how he does the rest of the week. He's dealing with a shoulder injury, but I agree. The Steelers' defensive line was supposed to take over the game against the Texans. The offensive line, that didn't happen. And that's where I think Mike Tomlin is emphasizing pad level has to be better. Physicality has to be better. This team has to be back to cruising. And Najee Harris talking about on the flip side, I think the same answer for the defense is the same answer for the offense. This team has to get back to being physical. We talked about all offseason about how the drafting of the offensive line, getting Isaac Seumalo, getting Keanu Benton, getting Broderick Jones, guys like that, and trying to emphasize this team is going to play with grit. This team is going to play well. And Najee Harris even said the last time they played the Ravens, big difference. They blocked, and their defenders got off the blocks. They were able to win in the trenches. If you're playing, that's how the Steelers need to play each and every week. That's how they're going to win games with the way their roster is constructed, to try to base everything off of. I think on both sides of the ball, this game is going to come down to, can the Steelers' offensive line neutralize what the Ravens try to do with their defensive front and actually give them some space to run so that the offense can find its groove that way. And on the flip side, can they stop the run? Can they force Lamar Jackson to have to sit in the pocket and throw, and put him in some pressured situations where he's throwing in tough spots here? Brian, I just don't know if the Steelers' interior defensive line is going to shape up that quickly. The edge rushers are fine. They are doing their thing. The Texans schemed them out of it.
They've got to be more than fine though, like they were in week 2, in week 3 against the Raiders.
Yes, yeah. I agree. And it also comes down to the off-ball linebackers, who I think will be huge in this game because they were not making plays in space. Cole Holcomb, I thought, had his worst game of the season against the Texans. If he has his worst game, has as bad of a game this week, the Steelers are going to be in a lot of trouble because they need those off-ball linebackers to be in the right gaps, help in coverage, but also help in making sure when Lamar Jackson breaks, they are right there to help.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to your point on the Steelers' offense, I'm just not seeing a lot of avenues for success because, Najee talked on Wednesday about how they've had success against the Ravens in the past by dominating the box and imposing their will, essentially. But the Ravens know that too. And I think with Kenny Pickett, the way he's played lately, other than week 3 with the knee injury looming, they are, Mike McDonald, their DC, he's going to cook up a plan that probably does put 8 in the box and dares the Steelers to run it at them. And if that happens, Najee would be the first to tell you, do you understand football? When they're stacking the box and putting 8 men in there, what do you want us to do? We can't make holes out of thin air. So that's where the X's and O's and the execution is going to come into play here. And not super optimistic for the Steelers looking at this matchup on paper. I'm going to go Ravens 24, Steelers 15, and even that many points. I'm kind of just saying it because there's no way they can be held in single digits again, right?
You'd think, but I'm with you on this. I think that it is too soon for the Steelers to bounce back from their problems right now. I think that they'll bounce back in the sense
they're limping to the bye.
Right, they're limping to the bye. They're dealing with so many injuries right now. This is a Steelers team. I think that you start to see the run game be a factor. I think they find some rhythm there, and it does help them in this game. I also think the defense does bring some edge. I'll also say Marlon Humphrey, I think, is also expected to miss this game, which could help them if they can.
He's back at practice, so he's trying to get there. We'll obviously know more Friday, but
he's trying. But we've heard a lot of different reports that they might try to rest him as well. But either way,
When you
Even
mention the injuries that the Steelers have, though, Chris, I mean, that's worth pointing out. Ronnie Stanley, the Ravens' left tackle, has been out since week 1. Marlon Humphrey hasn't played this year. Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham were out last week. Lamar Jackson was throwing to Brian Carter and Chris Batko. Who's actually my mom. But no, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I mean, it's
and Zay Flowers. He was Zay Flowers.
He had Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. But all I'm saying is every team's got injuries. So
every team's got injuries.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's one thing here is the Ravens, they've managed, and the Ravens, that's what they've done for the last few years, right? They've been injured up and down. They lost Lamar Jackson last year and still found a way to make the playoffs. That's not an excuse for the Steelers, but it's an acknowledgement. That's why I have a hard time picking them this week. It's just they're too hurt up and they're trying to find a rhythm, and it's tough to find that rhythm when you don't got your guys out there. So I'm saying a similar score. I've been thinking 23-17 Ravens. This comes down to the Steelers getting the ball late and having a chance to go up, but then not being able to capitalize on it because they'll need to take to the air. The Ravens will be ready for it, and that'll be in a predictable situation. So the Steelers get to the bye at 2-3, but they have to hope that they start to get healthy after the bye so they can start finding their rhythm after that. We'll see how that plays out here in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's Brian Batko from the Post-Gazette.com. Brian, anything that the Steelers fans need to be looking out for that you got coming up?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have our scouting report as we always do, keys to the game, key matchup, and I'm going to take just a look at, it's been a year of Pickett now for the Steelers. We're officially a calendar year into the KP8 era. I'm going to look into the good, the bad, and maybe what it's telling us about the future with him.
Absolutely. Check that out at post-gazette.com. I'm your host, Chris Carter of the North Shore Drive podcast. Thanks for tuning in on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel for all of our daily content that comes out from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Like I said, we got a special episode coming out Saturday with the Acrisure Fan Advantage, previewing this game one more time with a Ravens expert. We'll do that right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For 3 months of digital access to post-gazette.com at 99 cents, click the link below in the description.